I'm going to be doing a little bit of a flash tour, I suppose, of one particular esoteric language that really took my attention. And then I'm going to roughly just talk about some of the benefits, the ramifications, questions around esoteric languages in general. So I guess the main thing to start with is kind of trying to figure out what actually is an esoteric language, and I'm kind of just interested to see who has dealt with esoteric languages, who had never heard of them before this meetup, just by thumbs or message or whatever that might be. See how this works. Didn't see much there. Okay, I'm gonna assume that means not much. Okay, so before we actually get into talking about what an esoteric language is, I think it's actually a bit more helpful to think about what a non-esoteric language is, what are the common languages that we're using. Oh, I've seen someone reply, come across a white space by chance, but no other experience. Cool, I think that's you, Nick. Yeah, so they're, as the name suggests, they're a bit more to the side, a bit more unheard of, and we'll kind of explore why that might be. So the standard esoteric language, standard programming languages that we're dealing with generally fall into a few categories, which are, they are ultimately designed to be useful. We're using them in production code. They're designed to have clear syntax so that we as programmers can actually use them more easily to solve the problems that we need to solve. And there's kind of this circular system going on where, because they're popular, people devise libraries that makes them even easier to solve problems, which then increases their popularity, and it's a self-fulfilling thing. So they're the kind of categories that we can think about the standard languages falling into, which helps us think about what an actual esoteric language is. And you'll see a lot of the same rhetoric online. I think a lot of articles seem to copy off each other, and there's really not much literature out there as far as esoteric languages, but there's a few main categories to think about, which is that they're designed to push what it is that we really mean by coding and what coding can look like, what programming can look like. This one's a bit more of a contentious thing that I think we'll probably discuss later in more depth. They're kind of designed to be useless, have less utility, be less useful, whatever way you want to describe it, which is kind of a strange way to think about designing something to be useless. And then because of all that, they're also designed to be actually very difficult to understand anything that's going on, and they're pretty difficult to be used to solve problems, which is kind of the, arguably, some would disagree, the main point of programming as well. So here is a language called Piet. It's named after the artist Piet Mondrian, and some of you might know him because he painted that picture over there. So this is a little flash forward to what it's going to look like. So someone decided to design a programming language that would look like Piet Mondrian's work. And here is a program written in Piet. Just in the chat, anyone have any guesses as to what functionality this program does? It's a very simple, almost kata-like function. Any guesses? Hello world. It's actually a little bit more complex. We'll see a hello world later, actually. Factorial, it is actually a factorial. That was a really good guess. I'm going to have a little tour about how this is how this language is working. But at the most basic level, it actually reads each block of color. There's a certain meaning assigned to that, and we'll kind of show what that is later. And weirdly, it reads clockwise, and then so it's going all the way across the top, down, doing a little jazzy thing there, and then this over here is the end of the program. So let's look at how that's actually being constructed. So the main thing, this idea of the blocks of color having significant meaning, I've seen a term online called codals, like code pixels. So I'm going to try and refer to that, but I'm very bad at actually referring to it. And the language is made up of 20 distinct colours, white, black, and then all of these. But what's, I think, a bit interesting is that the meaning doesn't come from the codals themselves. It comes from the transition from one codal to the next. So there's a cycle of colours and lightness. And then the meaning that you get is based on how many hues or lightness different it is. So for example, if we went from light red to green, that would be 2 steps in hue and 1 step in lightness. So that would be modulo, the modulo operator. And if we just went from light red to light green, that would be the divide operator. So kind of not so easy to read in many respects. You're having to keep in mind what each transition means. But I want to actually point your attention to this area at the bottom where it says in number, in character, outnumber, out character. And because we're dealing with just color, there's no text, there's no numbers. So to do anything like that Hello World program that Christopher mentioned before, like the way to convert blocks of color into a character, into a number, is just the number of blocks that you're using. So for numbers, that's a bit clearer. You use 100 blocks for the number 100. But when you get for a character, you start having to use their Unicode characters. So doing something like Hello World, you start getting into the 90s for every single character. So you get these really big chunks of color just to represent quite a small string of characters, which, Christopher, you'll be happy to know, leads me on to a nice Hello World program over here, which is a bit wild to say the least. And then we can see again the little end of the program there, but it's still doing the same. It's still reading clockwise. The transitions still mean similar things, in, out, character, things like that. So that's not all. There is more. I picked, if we go back there, I picked green as an example because that is, thank goodness, every tech talk has a Hello World example. Yeah, always. So I picked green because because that is actually a unit that has its own significant meaning when we're dealing with these programs. So there are 2 colors that, regardless of the transition, have a specific meaning. And green is to do with flow control. So in this one over here, we've got a lot of green going on, and that's dealing with conditional logic, looping, all of that jazz. So any guesses as to what that is? Flow control. If actually a breaking program, because it's an infinite loop, it's just going to keep redirecting round and round and round. It's flow control in that very visual way. Is when you learn about flow diagrams in school, it's really just changing the direction in a very visual way, which I personally quite like. It. I think it's a nice tool to visualize how you're changing the branches of your program. So this would be an infinite loop, nothing happening. Oh, someone actually got it, infinite loop. Mike, you get 5 points. Keep track of them. With a program like this, we've got these green flow control codals. They're actually acting a bit more like an if statement. So this is an even odd program. If I am correct, like I said, it's pretty difficult to remember the transitions. I think this section here is checking if it's even, go here and end the program there. If it's odd, go there. I will double check that later, just in case anyone tries to sell that to with a bit of confidence there. I am not the most confident in that one off the top of my head. So then we've got another one. This one you can kind of recognize a similar pattern here. We've got a big block of colors. So that is going to be something coming in, whether that's a number or a letter. In this case, it's a number, because this program is a countdown program, and it's putting in like 10, there's no actual distinction how many blocks that is, I think it's 10, as a number, going round, decrementing one every time, checking is it 0 yet, and then it branches back up if it's not 0, and then it keeps going round and round and round. Sound interesting? Sound weird? Sound reasonable? People still following? Good, cool. So we talked about green. The only other special one is this black, because we're not seeing that anywhere else. And we're kind of seeing, we're seeing this symbol in all these programs, and that is the signifier of the end of the program. So the way that this is actually working, I thought was a bit wacky when I first learned about it. But if green is flow control, then black is flow restriction. Nothing can pass a black block in that direction. So it's going clockwise, it gets channeled into this, what I think looks a bit like a space invader personally. Agree to disagree if no one else thinks so. And it goes in, and then it meets a green codal, which changes the direction, and then let's say it goes up, it hits black, so it can't progress any further, so then it changes direction again because it's still on the green, hits black again and again and again and again and again. And the way that Piet works is that it will try 8 times, it will try 8 direction changes, and if it can't go anywhere, it will just cut out, you know, oops, can't go anywhere, I'll just quit the program. That's pretty much how it works. So this is always the end of the program, and in a way that I think is a pretty inefficient way to try 8 times before you exit. Oh yeah, and this is what I was saying about, this is effectively, while it's still 1, keep decrementing 1 and go around. Cool. So in the spirit of Piet being an artist, the whole language being designed to be more colourful, inspired by his work, this is a, you know, quote unquote normal is prime function, but as with white space in normal languages, where you can just put comments and the comments aren't read, we can also do other things in the white space here. So this is another is prime function. So black being still restrictive is not going to cause any problems. Like these blue blocks aren't going to be read. There's no worry about the code at that point. Should I leave those questions to the end, or should I answer them now, Nick? I'm just wondering. I'm seeing.
No, feel free to answer questions as you go. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's me. I was kind of intending that as a seed question for the end. But
Let's leave it at the end then.
Everyone pretend they didn't hear anything. No one saw anything.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So definitely one of my maybe not personal goals. I don't think I'd be that talented, but hopes in life is that I will be able to see a Piet program that is like really, really, really detailed artwork. You know, think Mona Lisa, that is also still a functional, you know, program. That is my hope in life. I'm hoping someone out there is working on that. If someone can make art with toast, I'm sure they can do it with this. So I guess there is a question of why does all this matter? Why are we talking about esoteric languages in the first place? And I put up those 3 points, those 3 categories that we kind of framed our idea of esoteric languages at the start. The idea that it's pushing the limits of coding, they are useless or less utility, and it's very difficult to solve problems. And I'm going to bat those away one by one. So when we're talking about pushing the limits of coding, first of all, I think there is possibly a misguided idea about esoteric languages taking what already exists in programming in general, concepts, ideas, tools, just internalizing it, jumbling it up, making it difficult, and then not doing anything with that. But it is a two-directional system. Esoteric languages have created new modes of thinking that are able to positively affect the wider coding community, the ways of thinking and programming. And particularly the one that I think you'll see the most if you do some research online is this idea of visuospatial syntax. And no, I've had a few people ask, that is not a typo. That is actually how you spell it for some reason. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but visuospatial is about the relationship of and spacing between objects, a bit more of a way that brains think, you know, in terms of objects around them and perception, things like that. And you can kind of see that, particularly with languages like Piet. It's not so much about the linear grammar, it's about how things are interrelated, how the colours are relating, where it is on the page. So there is a positive outward effect of new ideas being generated in esoteric languages that can impact the wider community rather than just taking it in and jumbling it up for no reason at all. And I think something that, I don't know what people think, but certainly for many, coding isn't just a job that you do, you don't just solve a problem. There's definitely a moment of like, that is a sweet piece of code, I'm very proud of that, because you've somehow expressed yourself, expressed your style in it. And that definitely comes more and more and more with languages that are, you know, a bit newer, but different tools, like Piet, where you can really be expressive, really show your interests in the program that you're writing. It doesn't have to be quite so static in the way some languages really force you to be. So that's pushing the limits. And then this idea of useless is definitely one that I want to undercut. I don't want anyone to leave and think they are completely useless. So I think the first thing that we can really think about is some programming languages which have swear words in the name, which I will not mention, definitely reveal some of the quirks, or in some people might say problems with languages. So there's one based for JavaScript where it is absolutely wacky, just a million strings of exclamation marks and question marks somehow gets you fully fledged programs. So that definitely is an interesting revelation of what cracks there might be in a language, or how you can rethink about what an existing language that you use in your day-to-day language can look like, which I think, if we're trying to be critical about everything that we're creating, that's a good thing. It's effectively a bit of a test. You know, what happens if I do this? Oh, it still works. That's a bit weird. But then I think there's more to it. I think with esoteric languages, because it's not so rigid in this syntax, that syntax, there's an element of promoting higher order thinking. We're not getting bogged down with the nitty-gritty syntax. We're able to visualize a loop as just 4 squares and it just keeps going around. You can think about teaching people in much more higher order terms without worrying about the specific, you know, you need this bracket there, you need that bracket there. The idea of flow control, especially the way they teach it to kids, is, you know, being very like arrow that way, that can be very, very useful if you have different modes of teaching it that aren't so rigid. And then on the same kind of note, we have this idea of accessibility. Coming from a teaching background, I teach a few people who have had like pretty bad dyslexia, and particularly like strict syntax with brackets, semicolons, you know, whatever the language is, can cause a lot of problems. But like, imagine a situation where these languages aren't considered esoteric and they become even a little bit more into the mainstream. How amazing that would be, and how many more doors could be opened for different learners, different backgrounds, more visual learners. I also came from an English background, so there's a language based on Shakepeare out there, and that would have been like just a really cool thing to learn about there, and would have definitely piqued my interest. So I want to say that esoteric languages put out more than they just take, which I think is definitely a misconception, that they don't produce much, but they are able to be so accessible and so many people who have different learning styles. And I definitely want to highlight this with this comment. that I used to find pretty funny, actually. The first time I gave a talk on Piet a few years ago, I thought it was kind of funny that this Kelly Boothby wrote a comment about about the difficulty of Piet being in using pastel colors, how it's difficult to tell. But the idea that you can take a language, create a program, a Hello World program with non-pastel colors to make it clear for yourself, is actually an amazing tool that you could just take a language, make it easier for yourself to understand, which is something that you can't really do in a lot of languages. You can make it clear with comments, you know, you can make things clear with better named variables, but you can't eliminate a whole chunk of the language and still have it work and also work for you. So I really think that's a really cool thing personally, and I feel bad that I used to find that comment funny, because it's actually an amazing thing that to even think about, to eliminate something that just doesn't work for you personally. And with that, I'll say thank you. That's my bit over. Here's some resources. I found a really great thesis on esoteric languages and visual spatial syntax and stuff. It's a long read, but it's pretty cool. And then the homepage of the creator of Piet as well, and some links to some other esoteric languages. But yeah, that's me. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great, and thank you so much. Let's basically all unmute and show our appreciation for Anat. So we will now swap to questions. So if people would like to type any questions they may have in the chat, and Chris will basically curate and ask people to unmute and ask their question if indeed there are any questions. Chris.
Okay, so I've put a couple in, but I don't, you know, I helped run this, so I'd rather other people had a bit of a pop. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? If not, I'm going to ask mine. Okay, so I think I'll ask the second one. Ooh, no, too late, Mike. I'm going to ask mine first. Does an esoteric language have to be Turing complete? Does it have to be a proper like a full programming language? Yes,
that's what I've read. I haven't actually found any languages that claim to be esoteric that haven't been Turing complete. So I think that is the case. That's the official line.
Got it. Okay. Mike wants to know if you have a favourite esoteric language.
Probably just because of my background, I'm a pretty big fan of the Shakepeare one. It's very dramatic. There's like enter character for like a new variable coming in. It's really quite good.
Exit stage left. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. And my other question, unless somebody posts one in the next 5 seconds, does it have applications in steganography? Could you stick a little Piet program in the middle of a JPEG?
Chris, can you explain what steganography is?
Yeah, sorry. Steganography is hiding meaningful things in plain sight. It's kind of cryptography, but yeah, stegano is Greek for hiding stuff. Could you put a little Piet program in a JPEG and nobody would notice unless they were looking for it?
Yeah. Do you mean like having a running program? Because I feel like that would be a bit of an ethical problem, to just say you can download this and it can just run in as you read it.
No, I think you send it to someone, and even if somebody decrypts your message, they still don't know there's a little Piet program in there. It's a silly question. You could do it.
Like an Easter egg.
Cool.
Yeah, like an Easter egg.
Any questions? Otherwise, we'll just flip onto the panel session if that's okay with everyone. Yeah. Okay. So let me just share my screen again, and we will move now to the panel. And I'd like to introduce a couple more people. We have Mike Oram as the director of Maiden Academy, and Alio Yakas, who's a junior developer at CreditSafe. And I guess an initial question for me is that, so Anat was arguing that esoteric languages aren't useless. Do the panel agree with this or not?
I think I would say that they definitely have a place, from my perspective. I mean, it sounds like the Shakespeare esoteric language was something that grabbed Anat when she came across it. So Anat, I've got a question for you. Do you think that if you came across that Shakespeare language, that it would have pulled you in to coding sooner?
Yeah, I reckon so. I think, like you said that before, that you really enjoy the problem solving aspect to it. So I think bringing those two together, like if you can have something that you love that comes into something that you didn't even know that you would enjoy, that's an amazing way to make a leap from one thing to the other.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested to see if anyone in the panel or the audience, I don't know, it feels like they've been particularly grabbed by coding as art as well. Like, is that something that people like now going to want to explore? Because I think that's our main idea, right? Is that is it something to grab you?
So the question is an esoteric language a hook that could get you into programming? Is that your point, Anat?
Yeah.
Have people experience that kind of, it's been a path, or it's been a signpost into coding, but from perhaps a more left field way into the industry?
I think it's the idea of fun, isn't it? I mean, I'm looking into sort of Arduino and Raspberry Pi at the moment, and after over 10 years as a developer, you can get a bit jaded. But just the pure fun of making this little thing tweak or jump or beep or something like that.
I think for me, the esoteric languages sit at both ends of the spectrum, right? So you've got what you're talking about there, Chris, with experienced developers like ourselves, using them for fun. There was a mention of an inappropriately named one related to JavaScript earlier, which I have a particular enjoyment of, mostly because it takes the mick out of one of my favorite languages, which is great fun. But on the other side of it, you have people that may see programming or coding in a certain way, as just people tapping away on keyboards kind of thing. And actually, if you show them, well, no, you can achieve the same thing with art, or you can achieve the same thing with music, or you can achieve the same thing by placing random objects on your desk and taking a photograph of it, which is a thing. Then it opens an entirely new world of programming. Like, who thought that was programming? So I think like there's two aspects to it. There's the bringing in people from completely different backgrounds, to making people think about programming in a completely different way. And then there's the fun languages that us maybe more experienced programmers might want to just play with for fun.
So picking up on that point about bringing people in, so is it the case that we're talking about maybe neurodiversity? So people who think in different ways, and there might be specific languages that appeal to them because they think that way. Is that the point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even think it, like, I mean, I guess that it all depends on how you define the term neurodiversity, but it's certainly about people with different interests or different, as well as different ways of thinking and different backgrounds, and just diversity in general, just all different ways of kind of approaching things. I do not come from a music background at all, but many of the people that I've taught at my bootcamp tell me that writing music is like problem solving, and actually that was one of the things that kind of got them into programming, because they started writing music and they enjoyed the problem solving of it, and then they came to programming through that route. And actually, well, if writing music is like problem solving, why can't we program with music? And actually you can, it turns out. So yeah, I think it is all about that different way of thinking and changing people's opinions as to what programming is and how we can achieve it, and then bringing more people with different ways of thinking into our industry.
Presumably, Mike, the bootcamp industry is interested in diversity of its applicants and people who are actually learning to code. So it's in the interests of the industry, as well as broadening out So is that recognized? Is that already kind of a thing, or is the bootcamp industry actually using this as a way to be as wide as, cast the net as wide as possible?
I don't want to take up all of the answers to these questions. I have to, so for me personally, at Maiden Academy, we don't use esoteric languages at all as sort of a way of bringing people in. Maybe we should. I think that perhaps we're not quite there yet. They're relatively in their infancy, and they're also very complicated. If somebody came to me and showed me one of those pictures from Anat's talk and said, "This is programming, how do I fix it?" I don't know. I haven't got a clue. But I think that, I think the idea that can be used as programming, it certainly could be something that we should be doing that way. As you say, the bootcamp industry definitely is, huge around diversity. It's one of the biggest things that we do. So fostering ways of bringing in people with different ways of thinking and different approaches to programming is definitely what we should be doing. So yeah, perhaps we should be using more esoteric languages.
And Alio, you're sort of freshly through a bootcamp with Knology. What was your experience? What was your sort of way in there, and your experience of of being a graduate of the system?
So I think, well, with Knology, we didn't do anything with esoteric languages. Esoteric languages is actually something that I came across over the past couple of weeks. Funnily enough, I got actually introduced to coding something called LOL code, with the idea that it's basically all about memes and stuff like that, and it's really targeted to basically modern pop culture. And I think it comes across as a really good way of getting younger people into coding who wouldn't have necessarily thought.
So that's aimed at millennials, then, is it? That sort
yeah, I would say so. For example, like one of the things that they have is, "Oh, you see me now," for example, and that's their version of a console log. They have like "K thanks bye" as a return statement and things like that, and it's not things that you're going to be reading in production code and thinking, "Oh yeah, this makes perfect sense." But as you get to the younger audiences, I think it's a really great way of actually getting them involved, because you give like a 16-year-old a piece of text that says, "You see me now," they're going to be like, "Okay, cool. So I'm going to be printing this out." You have like a "K thanks bye," and that will explain. You will understand that is where you're terminating. That is the end of like whatever code that you're doing. So it's not something that we did in Knology, but it's I think that it's definitely got its place. And I think that a very important thing about esoteric languages is that we did see Piet today, which to me is quite complex, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily something that I would, if I saw that coming into coding, would initially grab me. It would grab other people, but not necessarily myself. It does strike me something very interesting that I'd like to try later on as a challenge. But I think it's important to know that there are other esoteric languages out there, and that I think can be very useful for actually grabbing the wider audience and introducing them to coding in a more fun and relevant way.
Yeah. And that, I was interested in the point you made sort of between the connection of the arts and coding, because I sort of recognize there is a sort of a live coding thing that's happening, especially within music. And I was wondering whether, do you see kind of that live coding as an esoteric language? And do you see that as a trend that's going to possibly strengthen over time?
I definitely see it as a trend. I think the idea of being able to create something that is immediately and widely enjoyable is something that a lot of people try and do. So I think that can go up. What was the first half of the question now? Sorry.
I was wondering whether live coding and the sort of the connection to the arts, whether the live coding thing is is it a fad or is it a longer term trend? And would you class that as an esoteric language if people are like live coding music, with samples and things like that?
I guess if we go back to that thing that Chris mentioned about it being Turing complete, I'm not sure what esoteric what creating music can achieve in that frame. I don't know if anyone else knows that as to it. I definitely wouldn't call it useless. It's not really trying to solve a problem either. It's different than that. It's trying to create something rather than solve something, which I think is maybe if we're talking about esoteric languages being in their infancy, then this is possibly just something new, that there's no problem to solve really. Or maybe that's just my way of thinking, because Mike, you mentioned how a lot of people that you've taught think about music as a problem to solve, so maybe that's just my perspective.
Yeah, I think that the infancy thing is really important there, and that, you know, we're fairly new to doing languages in this kind of way. But I think that that actually, as you know, as we build more esoteric languages and kind of as we start to understand them a little bit better, that they will solve problems that perhaps we don't necessarily realize that we have. I think one thing that kind of immediately strikes me is the sonic languages, so languages that are around sound and music. Well, maybe that's a way to make programming easier for people with visual impairments. You know, maybe that's a way to allow people to use computers in general without that have visual impairments or that have physical disabilities. And I think that there's a lot of scope with them to do things that perhaps we haven't thought about, or that aren't even problems for us yet.
Yeah, see, so that would sort of take the diversity to the sort of the next level. They are by definition inclusive if we are including everybody in society and making them able to code and understand code in a sense. So I think that's a really a really important point. But picking up on the infancy thing, are esoteric languages in their infancy? Presumably programming languages have been around for a long time. Is the infancy thing, how important is that?
Define an esoteric language again. If we go to the original definition that Anat gave us of being difficult to solve problems and potentially not being designed for us as humans, I mean, binary fits that pretty well. I can't write it, but all languages are based off of it. So one could argue that every language since we've started is kind of or at least at the beginning was esoteric. So it's very hard to kind of define these things. But I think that in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, really, we've with things like lol code and white space and all of those kinds of things, we've gone from, okay, we're developing languages now to make them more and more and more user-friendly, developer-friendly for us, to now, well, actually, can we write some languages that are completely different? And for me, that's what we're talking about here, really, is the modern esoteric languages, and they are in their infancy, in my opinion, definitely, and that I think they can go a lot further. Yeah,
so it's kind of exploring, and to your point, Anat, it's kind of like pushing the boundaries in whatever the boundary is. It's going to be exploring, and that's that bit of experimentation that comes with that sort of territory of pushing a boundary.
Yeah, and I think even I just keep going to Brendan's question, something that would be more expressionistic like Monet and Mondrian. I keep having this image of, as we develop, as if people choose to develop these languages more and more, particularly with Piet, like this possible idea of version control and just like layer upon layer upon layer of art to build up something that looks far more expressive, but still functional, and have that sophistication that languages now can have. Like if you could just edit one little bit at a time and kind of have that history, would be really cool. Like a little diversion, but yeah.
Do you think that's the impressionism there that Brendan is kind of hinting towards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would go on.
I was going to say, I like that expression. More Monet than Mondrian.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we're sort of running out of time, I guess. I had kind of one other question that I was interested in, and perhaps it's a little bit of a swerveball, but it was keyed off something you were saying earlier, Mike, offline, about the hook for you was a meditative aspect of coding. So when we were talking about hooks into programming, the meditative aspects of programming was important for yourself. So is that another hook? And do you think that's quite common, like for people to get into it through more of a meditative activity?
Yeah, so for me, it's absolutely sort of the reason that I got into programming. I mean, the idea of being able to build anything was great, but as soon as I sort of sat down and started doing it, and just it was a mindfulness practice for me, you know, completely getting out of my head and just getting into a problem. And I think esoteric languages kind of take that to the next extreme, right? In that you're not there searching for the missing semicolon, which we've all done. You're figuring out what the next color in the picture needs to be, or whether it's an A minor or an A major, or you know, whatever it is. It is problem solving to the absolute extreme. So if you're looking to get into programming because you enjoy problem solving, which I think, in my experience at least, is one of the main drivers, the main reason that people want to. I know actually another member of the panel will have an opinion on that. Then yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to pick up on that point for Mike around, you know, the motivation for you?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think that yeah, I wouldn't really know where to go on with this. I won't lie. I'd let Mike take this one.
What was the motivation for you to get into programming in the first place?
So for me, it was all about problem solving. Throughout my high school and stuff like that, I studied maths, physics, and chemistry. And I realized that throughout that, it was all to do with the problem solving that interested me. But then I did get experience with computing at school, and it wasn't really my cup of tea, because all we were really doing was Excel documents and stuff like that. And it wasn't really computing. It was just more like admin, how to use computers, as opposed to actually how to actually code. So yeah, that wasn't something that really grabbed me. But then when I went to university, I studied physics, and there I had to use MATLAB, where I actually did a bit of coding. I don't know if any of you have used MATLAB before. I'm not a massive fan of it now, looking back at it, but at the time it was really good fun. I really enjoyed the fact that it was, you know, you'd be grinding away at your screen, you'd get to a problem, and then after you'd be in the zone, but you'd get the solution, you'd be super happy, super proud of yourself. So that's really what gave me the idea that actually, wait a sec, I like problems. I like problem solving, not problems. I liked what I'd experienced with coding, and that was really what pushed me into my path with tech. It just took me a bit longer than I planned to get into it.
Yeah, great, thanks for that. And Anat, maybe sort of a final word from yourself. Do you see, what motivation do you see with the students that you're currently teaching?
I think maybe sadly, I'm not sure, Mike, I think your students coming from like a musical background and stuff sounds much more like invigorating as a start point. I think there's maybe a possibly sad, I'm not sure, industry advertising of like learn to code, or like make loads of money, or work at home, that kind of thing, which is like, you know, they're great benefits, but I don't think it's really selling the real enjoyment that you can have doing it, you know, unless they're selling you know, lovely front end development and UI and stuff. I think there's definitely a lack of that kind of thing, because that's definitely the perspective that I came at it from. I was just like, this is a job I could do.
But isn't that where esoteric languages can come in, though?
Yeah.
You know, as Nick was saying earlier, and that, you know, they could act as a new hook that we don't currently use to the people that are from music or art or whatever, as, you know, solve this problem, here's a paintbrush. You know?
Especially in young kids who like start out in school with like the robots that they get to move. It's basically like a version of that, just something to really fascinate you and be really much more tactile, rather than all these abstract concepts going on in a bunch of text that you don't understand.
Mm.
Yeah.